Hello, everyone. Hi. If I look like I'm wearing what I was wearing last week, it's because I am, because it's actually last week when I'm recording this. It is my son's spring break at the time that this will air. And so I decided I better read this chapter on a recording so I could share it because I missed 2 weeks when we went to Spain. So I don't want to do that again. In case you're new here, I'm Rosa Linda Román. I go by Rosa Linda, and I come in here on these channels once a week to share and read a chapter of my book. It's called Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, based on our adventures living on two separate sailing catamarans. So each week I read a chapter, and this week I'm on chapter 9. So without further ado, here we go. Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, Chapter 9, Gymnastics and Volleyball. Finding the balance between my deep conviction that exploring the world with your kids is one of the greatest gifts you can give them, and my family's work, school, and extracurricular schedules can be a real challenge. For Nathan, that meant getting creative and flexible with work. For school, we used a mix of workbooks and hand-me-down materials to keep the learning going when we were away from the internet. In most areas of life, we were able to find creative ways to make it work. But there was one area that was particularly difficult to find the balance in: gymnastics. Our oldest daughter, Ahava, started doing gymnastics in New Mexico when she was about 6 years old. Back then, it was at a little dance studio for fun. She and her sister Ziva did their somersaults and cartwheels and looked adorable. They had recitals where they dressed as mermaids or princesses, and it was all in good fun. But if you have ever spent any time around gymnasts' families or dancers, figure skaters, swimmers, or other intense solo sports, you know that it doesn't remain just cute, playful fun forever. This is something they don't tell you when they are happily encouraging them to keep at it. If your gymnast has any potential in the sport, their coaches will start moving them in the direction of competitive gymnastics. Recreational gymnastics, or rec, and competitive gymnastics are wildly different. As I see it, in rec gymnastics, you learn some life skills, get some exercise, and have fun with other bouncy, wiggly kids. In competitive gymnastics, at least for those that are thinking about college scholarships or the Olympics, as Ahava was, you give up all other extracurricular activities in your life. It is a major commitment, not just for the athlete, but for the entire family too. At the lower levels, levels 1 through 3, gymnasts train anywhere from 5 to 12 hours a week. That goes up to about 20 hours a week for level 4 and 5. Anything higher than that, levels 6 through 10, is considered optionals and becomes like a full-time job. When we moved onto the boat, Ahava was a level 4 gymnast in New Mexico. She enjoyed the sport, but was excited about our new adventure too. She was never one of those kids that spent every waking moment flipping and doing the splits wherever she went. At practice, she was all in and trained very hard, but she rarely worked on her skills independently outside the gym, which meant she needed coaching to thrive. When we left New Mexico, we didn't have a clear plan for how or if she would continue her sport. Before I get into how we made these seemingly diametrically opposed dreams work at the same time, let me tell you why I believe we were able to do so. Among the many tools I draw on for inspiration to live this awesome life, the secret is one of my favorites. The idea that we literally create the reality that we live in just by the thoughts in our head really resonates with me. This principle is often called the law of attraction, or LOA for short. I mention it here because I think if ever anyone had a good excuse for not pursuing their passion due to conflicting family obligations, it would be me. But I have always believed that despite their apparent opposing demands, the live aboard life and gymnastics don't have to be mutually exclusive. Yes, it is way more challenging, and no, you probably can't do it if you are planning to be Allie Reisman or Simone Biles. But if you are willing to get creative, you can make anything work if it matters enough. As far as Nathan and Ahava were concerned, it mattered enough. That meant that finding a gym where she could continue her training was a top priority the minute we moved onto the Dawn Treader. On June 8th of 2016, Ahava said goodbye to her teammates at the Albuquerque Gymnastics School, AGS, and we hit the road. Just 9 days later, she was already doing a trial run at a gym in Florida. The Dawn Treader was docked at Riviera Beach Marina in Palm Beach County. Gratefully, Palm Beach Gymnastics was just an 8-minute drive away from that marina. For the first 6 months we lived aboard, Ahava trained at that gym. This was both good and bad. It was good because she was able to maintain her gymnastics training and make some great friends while we fixed and upgraded systems on the boat. But it was bad because it tied us to shore and limited what we could do during those months. We ended up staying at Riviera Beach Marina until her last meet of the season in mid-December. Her performance that season was not what she or Nathan had wanted it to be, but I think she was amazing regardless of the scores. The fact of the matter is she was living on a boat and still maintaining her training enough to score in the 8.0 plus range on several events. This was no small feat. I have heard it said that if everyone is slightly unhappy with the outcome of a negotiation, but no one is outraged by it, then it is probably a fair compromise. I think that applies to finding the balance between living on a boat and pursuing gymnastics dreams. Ahava was happy to be training and maintaining, but not happy with her competition performance. I was happy to be living on a boat and preparing to sail, but not happy to be staying at a dock and not sailing very much. It worked well enough and offered some proof that there are ways to make anything work if you are willing to get creative. It took even more of this creative arranging once we sailed away from the Florida shore. Somehow, somewhat miraculously, we managed to pull off gymnastics training in Nassau, Bahamas, on the wrong end of the island with no car, and later in Hormigueros, Puerto Rico, while hosting a bat mitzvah there shortly after Category 5 Hurricane Maria devastated the island. In both those cases, got to start that one again. In 3, 2, 1. In both those cases, the mantra, where there's a will, there's a way, was seriously put to the test. For the first several months after we crossed from Florida to the Bahamas on the Dawn Treader, we were on islands with no gymnastics options at all. In fact, one of our favorite places in the world, Hopetown on Elbow Key in the Abacos, might have been our final destination if they had had gymnastics there. My dear friend and the local yoga, block therapy coach, and homegrown greens grower, Rachel Aberley, worked every possible angle on our behalf, talking to friends who had gymnastics connections throughout the Bahamas. Ultimately, we learned that there were 2 options for serious gymnastics training in the entire country, one in Freeport and one in Nassau. This sounds promising until you realize those are also the 2 biggest cities in the Bahamas, and the whole point of living on this boat was to not live in a city. In fact, I think this is the very reason that Nathan agreed to move aboard, despite the never-ending expenses and things in need of repair, to have the ability to find quiet anchorages away from crowds of people. The idea of moving onto a tiny boat to live in a crowded city in a place that would be hard to get to for his work so Ahava could train was not high on his list. So we went back to the drawing board and tried every creative option we could think of. In a perfect world, we would have found a way to set up a gym in Hopetown or at one of the other out islands. Marsh Harbor would have been ideal with its larger population to sustain a gym and easy water ferry access to the quiet anchorages in Hopetown. At one point, a friend of a friend who owned the Freeport gym seriously considered opening up a second location in Marsh Harbor, and we were all excited about that possibility. It would have meant a place for Ahava's training and given local kids a chance to explore the sport. While that idea was under consideration, I started trying to source gymnastics equipment that we could carry over on the Dawn Treader. Sadly, it was not to be. Buying the right gymnastics equipment is not cheap, and finding a building that can handle a gym big enough for advanced gymnastics training is almost impossible on an island with more tiki bars than warehouses. Ultimately, we had to give up on the dream of building a gym in the Abacos, and we continued on to Eleuthera, where gymnastics was also non-existent. From our post-Dawn Treader vantage point, a little Texas neighborhood with world-class gymnastics 10 minutes away, it's hard to express how hard it was to give up the dream of building that gym, however ridiculous and unlikely it was. On that tiny island, there were so many kids that would have loved to have a gym available to them. Sometimes second homeowners host little dance or tumbling classes for the island kids, and the response is always strong since extracurricular options are so limited. But for serious sports training or educational advancement, many kids leave these smaller keys for NASA or the US when they get older. This is exactly what two of our friends did in order to allow their daughters a chance to pursue their swimming careers. It is no easy choice to leave their beloved islands, but now that their daughters swim at the collegiate level, I'm pretty sure they feel they made the right choice for their family. I suppose it all comes down to our choices, doesn't it? The choice to live on a boat instead of a brick and mortar home. The choice to sail to the Bahamas instead of staying in Florida where gymnastics is readily available. All choices. The fact is, if I were committed enough to building a gym in Hopetown, I would have found a way to build a gym in Hopetown. Instead, I made the choice to continue exploring new horizons with my family. That said, we also made a choice to try to support Ahava's gymnastics goals, regardless of what big adventures we might be pursuing along the way. I should say we, the parents, and Ahava made that choice. I suspect if we left it up to Ziva at the time, she would have made a very different choice. With gymnastics and Nathan's work obligations always on our minds, we knew we could not stay in Eleuthera for very long, despite the amazing blue hole adventures we were having there. At the same time, Nathan had a work trip fast approaching. He could have flown out of Eleuthera's Governor's Harbor Airport, but that would have left the kids and me on the hook, at anchor, in an area with few other boats and a town that wasn't as easy to get around as some of the other cruiser hubs like Marsh Harbor or Hopetown. Since I had never been alone on the boat except at a marina at that point, I agreed that it might not be the best place to start. Plus, there were several blows in the forecast, which might leave us feeling pretty vulnerable if I had stayed there. So our choices were to try to find another, more cruiser-friendly island with a good airport in the upper Exumas, or make a beeline to Nassau. Ultimately, the decision was made to go to Nassau since there was a gym and plenty of marinas there, and we assumed transportation would be easier in a big city. Well, you know what they say about what happens when you assume. Having only been to Nassau on a cruise ship before this, we followed the advice of several cruisers and headed from Eleuthera's Rock Sound to Palm Key Marina. Palm Key is a delightful little marina on the southern part of the island where many boats stage as they await a weather window to cross to the Exumas. The problem is that New Providence Island, which most tourists refer to inaccurately by the collective term Nassau, is actually 21 miles across and 7 miles wide, and was far from the relaxed tropical island vibe we expected. Everywhere we went, there were drivers aggressively weaving in and out of traffic, honking and yelling obscenities in a manner reminiscent of New York City cab drivers, albeit with more delightful Bahamian accents. Plus, because the Bahamas were once a British colony, they drive on the left side of the road. In other words, driving around Nassau terrifies me. All the more reason that Palm Key Marina was so attractive. Quiet, farther removed from the big city, with a decent restaurant and working washers. The problem we discovered is that all the gyms were where one can train in advanced gymnastics were in Nassau proper, a 40-minute drive from Palm Key Marina, and we didn't have a car. This may have deterred us back in our landlocked lives, but when you live on a boat, it is just par for the course, and you expect to jump through a few hoops to make things work. By the time we arrived in Palm Key, Nathan had just a few days left before his flight to the US. While making arrangements for his own airport transportation, he also wanted to know we would be safe and settled before he left. His solution was a man named Harold. Dear, sweet, almost deaf, drives just like all the other Nassau drivers, Harold. Every day, Harold would drive the 40 miles from his home in Nassau, pick us up at Palm Key Marina, drive us back to the gym in Nassau, and do the reverse every evening. Those trips were also a bit terrifying, but far better than trying to drive myself. Although I don't think Harold understood a word we were saying 90% of the time. He was always so sweet and gracious, and we were grateful to have someone to rely on while Nathan was gone. We found the gym called Nassau Gymnastics through my network of Bahamian friends. It turned out that our friends, Pleasance and Chris Higgs, the ones with the daughters who swim for the Bahamas, had a connection to the gym's owner, who put us in touch with their head coach, Trevor Ramsey. Eager to get started, we had asked Harold to arrive early that first day. We gave him the address to the gym and put our trust into this total stranger to take us to this unknown place with only a vague address that didn't show up on Google Maps. After the awkward, mostly unintelligible conversation we had during the drive, Harold suddenly turned down a grimy alley behind a grocery store. I started to worry we were either horribly lost or about to make a quick drug deal before we drove to the actual gym. The alley turned out to be a dead end, and Harold pulled up in front of a dark warehouse with security bars in the back. Apparently, this was the place. As I stepped out of the car with my 3 kids, fearful thoughts washed over me. There was nothing to indicate this was the right place. The alley was crowded and bustling with forklifts beeping their backup warnings and workers hollering over the heavy machinery as they unloaded grocery supplies trucks. It smelled of old garbage and rotten fish. My reporter's brain kicked into high gear. This could easily be a drop-off point for human trafficking. No one would even miss us until it was too late. I didn't have a working cell phone, and the only one who might know where we were was doing his clinical work in Alamogordo, New Mexico. As I gathered my courage to walk up the steps and approach the nondescript security gate, I looked back at Harold. Of course he was still sitting there, that sweet, kind man, patiently waiting there to make sure we were safe. Regardless of what this gym would be like inside, I knew we were going to be okay. Sure enough, what we found inside was a delightful island gym full of eager kids and caring coaches. Sure, it wasn't a state-of-the-art gym with a polished storefront that we might have seen stateside, but it was the perfect place for Ahava to train for a month or so to regain some of her skills that had been neglected during the training-free weeks spent island hopping. Plus, Samuel, Ziva, and my visiting niece, Christina, also got to do some fun tumbling classes there. We all remember it fondly, especially Ahava, who shared a little of what she remembers from her time at Nassau Gymnastics. And I quote, "I remember they were very welcoming. They didn't have AC, which means they had to shorten their practices because it got too hot. When I first got there, I was terrified because I hadn't done gymnastics in so long. It was a new place, new people. But I got to train, which I hadn't been able to do in any other spot in the Bahamas because there are only 3 gyms in all of the Bahamas, 2 in Nassau and 1 in Freeport. The good thing is that every coach teaches a different way, and so you get all kinds of different opinions and see the different coaching styles. That also makes it harder because, say, one coach always wants your arm up and one wants them out on the beam, something like that. That can be hard. But they each give you different ways to think about things. Some are better at floor, some focus more on bars, etc. So you learn new skills. But being in a different environment is hard. It is hard physically. For example, since I had been off for so long, I was on straps a lot more than I would have been, which I made a note, meaning she had to use straps to hold her on the bar while attempting a move called giant. So she had the straps and a lot more than I would have been. So my hand was torn up and bloody. It is also hard emotionally starting somewhere new all the time. It can be really bad or much better because they don't know what to expect of you. That can give you a fresh start, but it is also bad because you are always having to prove yourself, which wasn't exactly the best for gymnastics. For example, when I got to Acrotex, the gym she trained in Austin, Texas, after moving off the boat, they looked at me and thought I was going to be great. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe she is that terrible." End quote. With that in mind, I asked Ahava, would you do it again if you had had the chance, or would you have done it differently? To which she replied, quote, "Half of me would have kept doing it like that just to do it, but it is so much harder on your body to be in it and to be out and in and out than to be consistently training. But the other half of me is like, no, I don't regret doing it. But maybe I should have just let it go once we moved onto the boat, and maybe we could have gone farther. I liked being able to tell people I was a gymnast, and I liked gymnastics. Even though it wasn't consistent at all, it was still something that I could go back to. Even though the coaching styles are different, everyone scored the same and the rules are the same. And I got to meet a bunch of different teams and people everywhere, which is really nice. End quote. In fact, some of her teammates remain her best friends to this day, and she keeps in touch with them no matter where we travel in the world. So there you have it, in her own words. It was hard, it was great, she doesn't regret it, and she would do it all over again if given the chance. Which, by the way, is exactly how I feel about living on a boat. That is chapter 9 of Losing Sight of the Shore, Gymnastics and Volleyball. Which, by the way, I didn't really mention volleyball, but we dealt with a lot of that as well, trying to get Ziva training for her sport, which became beach volleyball. And that was a little bit easier because you could just play on the beach. But it was a challenge and we got through it. Ahava stuck with gymnastics for many more years until she blew out her knee when we were in Texas. So it was an adventure. I don't think she regrets it. I know I don't. And that's it for now. I appreciate you coming to follow these chapters. If you're interested in the printed version, in the show notes, there's a link to my Substack, which has the chapters posted each week, print and audio. And of course, there's a link there if you just want to buy the book. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Rosa Linda Román. Bye.